Good morning, Derek Stone here with Big Book Wizard, and this is the Monday morning meeting. We are in week 10 of the doctor's opinion. Before we begin, just a quick disclaimer. I'm a life coach, interventionist, speaker, and man in recovery, not claiming membership in, affiliation with, or representation of any sort of organization, facility, group, whether it's 12-step or otherwise. Any references I make to Alcoholics Anonymous are made in reference to the book which shares that title. And all these videos I do, any information that I put out, any articles I write, it's all meant for educational purposes strictly, and it's not presented as nor to be construed as professional advice or an adequate replacement for other recovery efforts which may prove necessary, including detox, treatment, rehab, counseling, therapy, medication, meeting attendance, sponsorship, 12-step work, etc. Okay, remember you can win a free study edition Big Book by visiting bigbookwizard.net/enter. And if you live in the US, you can sign up for that. If you don't live in the US or you want to get to know some more of my content and some of the stuff that I create around recovery, you can sign up to get robust recovery checklist. I created this as a way of helping people who have worked the steps sort of check in on their recovery and see if they're having a balanced recovery. Okay, review of last week, we talked about the types of alcoholics that Silkworth lists, and they're not very important, but I do have the list right here, and we could see that these are just the ones he lists in the doctor's opinion. The psychopaths who are always going on the wagon for keeps, those types who are unwilling to admit that they cannot take a drink safely, and maybe these are the ones who try every means of convincing themselves or proving that they can drink like other people. Then there's the type that believe they can drink after a period of sobriety. There's the manic depressive type, and then there's the type who appear entirely normal. Now, unless you believe that these are the only 5 types of alcoholics that exist, then you have to admit that this list isn't exhaustive, it's not complete, and the doctor even says as much before he introduces this list. He says, the scope of listing types of alcoholics, it's beyond the scope of this book. And so you have to acknowledge that, identifying which one you are on this list, it's maybe not necessarily a worthwhile exercise. And that's because the second point here, that the phenomenon of craving is the unifying symptom. It's unlike any other symptom that alcoholics may or may not share in common. And so oftentimes you might hear people say, in the rooms, look for the similarities and not the differences. Well, really, we only need to look for one similarity. It's this similarity right here, this phenomenon of craving. We need search no further for any other similarities. It doesn't matter if we have nothing else in common. If we can relate around this, then we are both alcoholic. Now, this phenomenon of craving cannot be removed or cured by science or medicine. And we're going to review that a little bit. They talk about that in a couple of places in the book, but the doctor mentions that last week in the doctor's opinion. And then he goes on to say that abstinence is the only solution for the phenomenon of craving. We're going to be, in the doctor's opinion, leaving off on the paragraph that says these men and many others have one symptom in common. So you're looking for that. I think in my book it's going to be XXX. Page XXX, all these and many others have one symptom in common. While you're finding that in your book, I want to give a quick shout out to my supporters on Patreon. I cannot do these videos without your support, and if your name is on this list, then you are very near and dear to my heart. And if you'd like to support on Patreon for just $5 a month, I'll send you a nifty little bookmark like this. It's got the promises on the back for every step, and then on the front it's got the 9-step promises, and it's pretty sturdy 6-inch bookmark. You can show that off to all your friends. So on page XXX in the doctor's opinion, we are going to begin with all these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. Now, the doctor wasn't quite accurate here in the sense that, we know that an allergy today is something that you can actually do a skin test for because the body produces histamines. And so, strictly in a medical sense, that word's not correct. And we know that now. Allergies were a relatively new thing when this was being written. And so, that's why he was suggesting maybe this is one of those allergy things. Medically speaking, and I've said this 100 times, if you've been tuning in week to week, you've heard me say this, and it's the repetition that works for us. But honestly, it's a great analogy still, even if it's not medically accurate. It's a great analogy for what is taking place inside the body of an alcoholic once we take the first drink. He goes on to say this phenomenon of craving has never been eradicated by any treatment with which we are familiar. And of course, this is, permanently, I'm sorry, it has never been by any treatment with which we are familiar permanently eradicated. And this is echoed on page 31, actual page 31 of the book. And I felt it was important to create this cross-reference, so I made a slide for it. It says on 31, at the bottom of 31, it says at the bottom of 31, we are like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. Wait, did I list that wrong? It's not 31. Oh, yeah, it is 30. It's 30. I'm sorry, don't listen to me. Wrong slide. Page 30 of the book. It ends on the top of 31. It starts on the bottom of 30. We are like men who have lost their legs. They never grow new ones. Neither does there appear to be any kind of treatment which will make alcoholics of our kind like other men, meaning that we can drink like other men. Now, this doesn't mean that, meaning that they can drink like other men. We have tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, there have been brief recovery followed by still worse relapse. So all the other plans and tips and tricks that people incorporate to try to curb their drinking may lead to short-term sobriety. But once the relapse occurs, we find we still cannot drink like other men. Physicians who are familiar with alcoholism agree there is no such thing as making a normal drinker out of an alcoholic. Science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. And this was true in 1939 when the book was published, and it is still true today. We still haven't found a way to take someone who's got this phenomenon of craving and help them become a moderate drinker. Now, there is a movement outside of 12-step fellowships known as harm reduction. And there might be some other movements that incorporate harm reduction. And harm reduction is the idea that we can make drinking and then substance abuse safe. And I'm not schooled or well-versed in harm reduction. So forgive me if, if I speak out of turn, but my general understanding of it is that this is a way to allegedly make drinkers drink safely. Now, here is what I would say. This is nothing different from what Silkworth says earlier in the doctor's opinion, which is that, these real alcoholic types, these allergic types, do not respond to other methods. See, we've defined alcoholic as a person who does not respond to any other approach. They do not respond to anything that's not spiritually based, that's not 12-step based. They just don't respond to this other stuff. So they're not going to respond to the belladonna treatment or Antabuse or Vyvanse or whatever all these medications are that are out there. They're not going to respond to that. Meaning that I'm not saying those things don't help people. What I'm saying is there's a class of people those things don't help. These people aren't going to respond to cognitive behavioral therapy or EMDR or equine therapy or acupuncture. I'm not saying those things don't help people curb drinking. I'm saying there is a class of people for whom those things won't work. I mean, to claim that what you have as a solution is a catch-all for everybody. Look, the 12 steps don't work for everybody. They're not designed to. Right? They're not necessarily going to work for the person who could just go treat their depression and then they're going to quit drinking because they're just drinking from depression, right? And so to claim like, well, we've got this catch-all, like harm reduction is the solution and it's going to work for everyone. Well, I am going to offer that there is a class of people for whom harm reduction won't work. And that's the class of people to whom this book is addressed. It's just that simple. I mean, that's the conversation. It's not saying harm reduction is bullshit or that it's not going to help anybody. It's saying, look, there's a class of people who is going to be left in the dust by that method. And that group of people is going to need to be approached with a spiritual kit of tools. Right. And so when we say science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. Yeah. When you find the method that fixes every problem drinker and doesn't leave anybody in the dust, then you have, then you have outgrown the 12 steps. You found something that makes it obsolete. Right. And so that's sort of the conversation we're having. Okay. So back in the doctor's opinion, XXX. It, meaning the phenomena of craving, never been by any treatment with which we are familiar permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. Now, I want to be clear that this is not the only relief we have to suggest from alcoholism is entire abstinence. That's not the conversation. What it's saying is the only relief we have to suggest from this phenomenon of craving is entire abstinence. In other words, if the fact that we take a drink triggers something inside of us that guarantees we cannot control how much more we drink, then the only relief from that is going to be to not put a drink in your system. Now, here's the thing. This is about as old hat as anything else. And what I mean by that is if you think about the 6,000 years or 10,000 years that man's been crushing and fermenting grapes, in other words, making alcohol, that's been around for a long time. It's been around since before electricity. So we've been crushing and fermenting grapes and making alcohol. And then you think about, how does over the years, I mean, the oldest accounts of alcoholism are in the Bible, where they talk about, being beaten up and not knowing who did it and stumbling through the streets and not being able to control your drinking. I mean, I'm not saying those are, authoritative books necessarily. I'm just saying they're old books and they're referencing alcoholism. People from ancient times knew about alcoholism. So in all the time that people have been struggling with alcoholism, there hasn't been a single concerned spouse or friend or doctor or lawyer or employer or judge that has said, hey, buddy, maybe if you don't drink the first one, you won't get drunk. That's not new and revolutionary information. That's not the information presented in Alcoholics Anonymous by any stretch. And if you're hearing that in a meeting somewhere, just understand that's not the information in the book. That's not what we're presenting. In fact, I'm pausing here on this last line of the paragraph. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence, because I want it to sink in for a second. Because the next paragraph we're going to read, I guarantee you, is lost 90% of the places you'll ever go. 90% of the places you will ever go for recovery information, a meeting, a treatment center, coach, a counselor, anywhere. The next paragraph that the doctor states is lost, and that is this. Now, we're going to break this down as we go. This refers to what we just read, complete entire abstinence. This immediately precipitates us, which means precedes and instigates us into, well, who's the us? Not Alcoholics Anonymous, not the authors of the book, the doctors. Silkworth isn't an alcoholic. He's not a member or an author of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, technically he's writing this chapter, but he's not an alcoholic. So when he says us, he's referring to members of the medical fraternity. This immediately precipitates doctors into a seething cauldron of debate. Now, when doctors debate, they don't do it like politicians at a podium. They write in journals. So he goes on to say, much has been written in journals, pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. This is on the heels of just don't drink and you'll be okay. The thought that the only relief we have to suggest to alcoholics is don't take the first one and you won't get drunk. That thought launches doctors into this debate out of which the general opinion seems to be, hey, if these people's lives depend on them not putting a drink to their lips, they're doomed. I mean, think about that. Your life depends on you not putting a drink to your lips. That's the solution. That's all you have to do. And if we're resting your livelihood on that, on your ability to pull that off, you're doomed. And that's because there's another component to this thing. It's not just what happens once alcohol enters the system. We've spent a great deal of time talking about that because we want to highlight that it has a very simple solution if that's the extent of our problem. It would be simply abstain. And you might hear that in places you go and understand that that ignores that there's this other part of the problem that the doctor is acknowledging here in this paragraph, that most alcoholics are doomed if their life depends on their ability to not put a drink to their lips. If your life depends on that, if your life depends on you having the ability to not drink, yeah, you're in a lot of trouble. According to this doctor, you're doomed. And so that's pretty powerful information. And he's setting us up to be really interested if we're a real alcoholic. He's setting us up to be really interested in, fine, well, what do I have to do? If it's so hopeless, how do I fix that? How do I regain the ability to not put alcohol to my lips because I've obviously lost it? And of course, that's what he's going to get into in the next few paragraphs, which we'll cover next week. One thing I want to cover before I let you go, if you or someone you know needs help, feel free to connect with me at bigbookwizard.net/help. Give me some information and I can find the resource that fits you best, whether it's counseling, treatment, detox, near you, away from you, wherever you're looking to go. I can help you with that. And if you have any other questions for me, I'd love you to join the conversation. You can find me on social media, just about anywhere, anywhere that you might be hanging out. I've got a presence, and so would love to connect to people on Twitter. I don't do a lot of that currently because I don't know, Twitter feels like a ghost town, but if you tweet at me, I will respond. And so remember, you can join these Big Book studies every Monday morning. Just go to bigbookwizard.net/join, and every week you'll be sent an invite to log in and join these Big Book studies live. I will also be premiering each recorded video before the live recording of the next episode. So in other words, when this becomes available online, I'll be watching it live with my fans. And so you can also tune into the replay live on YouTube. And with that, I will say to you, happy Monday. If no one's told you yet that they love you, please let me be the first. And be well, and God bless.